Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well. How about a bonus upload? Before we get into it, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and the membership are in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They all were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. Finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into tonight's bonus, shall we? Alright, in this bonus, there is going to be a couple of video clips captured by Trailcam. First one we'll see is the original and then a zoomed in. I don't know exactly what is moving through the woods here. Definitely very creepy. Then there will be another one where there's looks like some sort of creature and a portal. Not really sure at all. And finally, a family bought a new home and they believe they have a dogman on their property. Let's get into it. Today's first encounter. The backwoods of North Carolina are full of old, sleeping homes that ought to be torn down. They dream only awful things. I grew up in a very, very small farm town with a population below 150 or so people. I will not name drop the town for obvious reasons, and even if I did, you wouldn't find anything to write home about. There's a caution light in several abandoned buildings, a barely functional gas station that will grossly overcharge you, and that's about it. You go more than a half a mile in any direction, and you will officially be outside of city limits. Though there are dozens of people who live in these heavily wooded farmlands that call the town home, simply because it's the closest thing in shouting distance, though that would be akin to saying that Mars was within shouting distance of Earth. I've had a few experiences in these woods that I cannot fully explain. I can describe them, and I will. But I cannot offer any scientific explanation for them. I know that tales of Wendigo and skinwalkers and other natural forest demons spook are popular, but Wendigos are a creature that belong to tribal legends and tribes centered around the Great Lakes of the northern United States and into the east coast of Canada. Skinwalkers are exclusively tied to the Navajo religion and Navajo group, which are in the deserts of the far west of the United States. Keep that in the back of your mind as you hear this. I first began to notice the presence when I was around 12 years old. Playing in the woods was really the only pastime I had available to me outside of playing video games, but video games got old rather quickly. I was an only child, and there weren't any other children in the area, so exploring the woods was a good outlet for my imagination. Prior to my first real experience, the spookiest thing in the woods around here would have been a venomous snake. Even then, the snakes we have aren't likely to kill you unless you just seriously neglect the wound or have an allergic reaction. Aside from them, the largest predators we have are coyotes, which are mostly afraid of humans, and the rare cougar that happens to be passing through, which is so infrequent that it isn't worth worrying about. So the first day in question was a normal summer day. I was out hiking, collecting rocks, building forts out of sticks, the standard things 12-year-old boys do. It was about sundown, and I wasn't quite ready to head home yet when I noticed something was off. During the summer in North Carolina, the woods are anything but quiet. You have a cacophony of sounds: cicada, crickets, frogs, birds. There's a whole chorus of wildlife that all wants to be heard. Heck, you may even get the occasional coyote pack howling or a bobcat screaming. The point of this is that these woods are far from quiet, and sudden silence in the woods at these times are not an accident. But that's precisely what I had noticed. All the noises had stopped. I could hear the wind between the mixture of the old growth and pines, and I could hear the distant babbling of the creek, but that was it. This was strange to me, but at the time I didn't realize what an ill omen it was in and of itself. I actually remember thinking that the water sounded peaceful and walking deeper into the woods to listen to it better. As I did, though, I began to get this overwhelming sense of foreboding. It wasn't the standard, I feel like I'm being watched. No, I didn't feel any eyes on me or feel like I was being followed or any of those standard paranoias. No, this was like, have you ever stayed at a party too? You got there at 9 and now it's 2 in the morning and suddenly you realize that you don't know anyone who's still there. You also didn't see this new guy come in, but he's glaring at you, and come to think about it, so was the girl in the kitchen. You've overstayed your welcome and it's probably time to go. That's exactly what it felt like. Even if I lack the metaphor to express it at the time, the air itself felt heavy. Everything in my mind and body was screaming at me that I needed to leave this place. It was not mine anymore. It had been fine in the morning hours, but now this was the domain of someone or something else, and I was not welcome. I remember feeling as if the trees were warning me, leave or else. So I did. Initially I walked, but by the time the sun had begun to descend and the sky had begun to darken into twilight, I was jogging. I never broke into a full-on sprint. I don't know why, but I felt showing too much fear was a bad idea. Eventually I made it back to the road and looked back to the woods. I didn't see anything, but that's when the feeling of being watched set in. I felt that there were eyes just beyond the tree line and out of sight, and they were staring right back at me. I went home and pushed the experience out of my mind as best as I could. From then on, I made it a point to always be out of the woods by dark, or to have a firearm with me if I knew I was staying later. I should note that there were several times after that I wound up in the woods at dusk and didn't have this feeling return. There weren't any special circumstances that seemed to summon it, just sometimes things were fine, others I all but sprinted for civilization. I didn't have any more overt experiences, however, until years later. I don't know what the catalyst was, but the activity ramped up dramatically in a year's span. The first experience like this was in October of 2018, and since then the woods have gone from home for the occasional unsettling experience to a place of actual danger and terror. I went camping with some college friends of mine during the October in question. In total, there were 3 of us, and we were mostly roughing it. We had a tent, but we chopped our own firewood and all of that jazz. We camped pretty deep in the woods. It was dark by the time we were fully set up and had finished cooking. We ate and then proceeded to get very drunk. I don't know how much we actually drank, as we were just sipping out of a handle of vodka and passing it around the campfire as we talked about everything from ghost stories to the more tangible fears in our lives, such as our dating lives and the prospect of post-graduation plans. This went on well into the night, with the stories growing more nonsensical and the laughter growing louder as the bottle grew lighter. By 1:30 a.m. or so, it had grown deathly cold. I decided that it was nighttime for me, and that I was going to get into my sleeping bag. The other 2 weren't ready to sleep yet, and one of my friends, we'll call him Frank, decided he wanted to smoke a cigarette. Meanwhile, the other friend, we'll call him Tim, decided that this was a good time for him to go climb a large rock about 70 or so yards away from the tent. Frank begrudgingly goes to supervise him while he finishes off his cigarette. So they're both a good 70, maybe 80 yards from the tent. I'm now in my sleeping bag and trying to fall asleep, and I can hear them laughing and talking, and it's obviously far away. It's right at this time that something heavy slams into the side of the tent. Like, heavy enough that I'm surprised the tent didn't collapse. I didn't move. I was drunk. But not so drunk as not to realize that whatever was out there didn't stop by to borrow a cup of sugar. That sense of dread filled me once again, and even though I had a shotgun with me, I couldn't bring myself to reach for it. I felt staying still was a safer approach. I heard something breathing. This was not human breathing, though. It was loud and weirdly wet sounding. It wasn't sniffing or anything like that, just deeply breathing. This only went on for a total of fewer of 10 seconds, and all at once it was gone. No footsteps, no banging on the tent, no gradual decline in breathing, nothing. It was gone. And Frank and Tim had never seen that it was there, let alone what it might have been. It's honestly probably best they didn't. They stayed up a while longer before turning in. I woke up first and stepped out to see if there were any footprints. There were not. But there was something more ominous. The entire clearing we were camping in now had scattered throughout the grass in early morning frost circles of bones. Not large bones, no, but crushed up and arranged bones of small creatures like rabbits or small birds, maybe. I would assume we were in a predator's hunting ground, save for the fact that the bones were neatly arranged in circles, all of the same size with equal spacing. I woke Tim and Frank up, and we packed up and left immediately. This last experience is the most recent and the most intense. There was a meteor shower not too long ago, and I returned to the clearing where my friends and I went camping to observe it, as there's very little light pollution there. It was stellar. I loved every second of it, but I wasn't out there long when my dog, I brought him with me, he's good company, started acting strange. He had pinned his hair back while lying down and was now staring very intently at the tree line. He wasn't barking or growling. He was silent, just watching. It was strange, but I assumed he had caught wind of a deer or other prey animal, and he was on the hunt, though he was far too lazy to actually go and chase it. After a moment, a nearby coyote howled. I felt a wave of relief as my dog's behavior was beginning to make me uneasy. He was just tense because of a coyote, and it would pass. There was something wrong, though. First, coyotes hunt in packs. It's extremely uncommon for a solo coyote to hunt and howl like the second my dog had begun to whimper now, and was shying back to the edge of the truck as though he were afraid. And the coyote was drawing closer, it seemed. My brain began to connect a lot of the dots. The woods were silent. That feeling had returned. I was in the same spot as the last encounter, and then I registered the sound of branches breaking. Coyotes were not heavy enough to do that, I thought. And the second I did, as though whatever was out there had waited for me to realize it, the coyote stopped pretending to be one, or at least I don't know. It stopped howling. And then it erupted into the most horrible sound I had ever heard. The coyote was laughing. It wasn't a hyena sort of laugh, though. It was this garbled, mangled mess of sound that sounded like an animal trying to do a piss-poor job of impersonating the cadence of a human laugh. And it was on this recording track where, after every fourth laugh, it seemed to loop. It was rapidly growing louder over the sound of breaking branches. I frantically jumped up, grabbed my dog, and fumbled for my truck keys to get out of there. As I tried to get my keys and get my door open, the laugh stopped only for this guttural and deep scream to resound from the forest. I say deep to emphasize that it was not a bobcat or a fox. They have high-pitched sounds. This was very low. It had the same pitch as, say, a roar, but it was in that same horribly botched nonsense that the laugh was in. Of course, the laughter resumed immediately, but as I got into my truck and turned the lights on, dead silence. In a moment of stupid bravado and curiosity, I turned my truck toward the tree line before I left to shine my headlights and see if I could see anything. And between the trees, I saw what seemed to be a silhouette of some sort of humanoid. Well, that's my experience. I don't know what was in the backwoods of North Carolina, and I don't want to know. And it's probably best if you don't try and find out. It doesn't seem to welcome strangers. Tonight's second terrifying experience. I had a conversation which quickly turned into an interview with a friend of mine who lived in my neighborhood until recently. His name is Gabe, so today I thought I'd try telling you his experience rather than reading it from the perspective of the person who lived it. Anyway, one evening he and I were talking when the topic of discussion meandered into territory of the strange, a thing that is quite common when I talk to my friends. As the key words began, pop-up, ghosts, vampires, dogmen, glitches, I noticed a peculiar spark of familiarity, of passion in his eyes that told me without a doubt he himself had seen something in his time. Gabe was native to Costa Rica. He grew up most of his life there before immigrating to the States. When I asked him if he had ever seen anything odd, his eyes widened. Yes, I did. He was half excited, half under his breath. Have you ever heard of cadejo? I hadn't. As he spoke, I ran an image search of the Spanish word. Gabe's eyes shifted, almost looking past me as he recounted the story of a dark night in San Jose. Costa Rica, when he was only 10 years old, he lived with his mother, father, and older brother in a small suburb called Las Animas, meaning City of Lost Souls. The family home was a brand new construction on a street with only 2 houses that were separated by several empty lots. Gabe's dad was a metal worker, so he made sure his home was fortified with steel doors, door frames, and window bars to withstand the high crime rate of the small town. The small backyard was walled in to make less attractive to robbers, and they had a Doberman guard dog named Rambo to keep watch when the family was out and about. The dog had to be trained to only accept food from Gabe's dad because thieves in the area were known to try and feed poison to guard dogs in order to gain access to the homes. In the neighborhood, there was typically an unspoken curfew for kids after dark. If they were away from home and not with their parents or didn't have a ride home, they were basically to stay the night, wherever they were, just to be safe. So one night, Gabe and his brother Miguel were over at their friend Carlos's house, who happened to live in the only other house on the street. They ended up staying until just after nightfall, but they really wanted to go home. Anyway, the two brothers debated with Carlos and his mother about walking home. Although both houses were extremely well lit with floodlights, there was about 75 yards of unlit dirt road with knee-high grass between them. Now, they have made this trek into the darkness before, but always with their mom waiting outside, keeping an eye on them. This time she was nowhere to be seen, making the boys feel a bit more apprehensive. As their debate continued, their mother finally stepped out and began to wave to them to come home. When they saw her, the boys started on their way at a jog as they turned to say goodbye to their friend Carlos and his mom as they went back inside. And this is where everything started to get weird. When the boys turned back to look at their mom, she was gone. What they saw instead, standing across the street in the middle of the field, a ways up the road, was a dog. The boys slowed to a deliberate walk as their old tennis shoes scraped along the unpaved, overgrown road. They stared at the dark figure in the distance, trying to decipher. They could tell it was a dog. No surprise they had two, but it looked far too large and imposing to be one of their Dobermans. They noticed the glimmer of a thick chain wrapped around the dog's neck. The eerie sound of metal rattling permeated the night air. For a moment, they told themselves that it was Rambo, that maybe he had broken free of his chain and got out. The brothers argued over whether or not it was Rambo as they walked steadily toward the house. The closer they got to where the mysterious dog was, the more they noticed that it seemed to be growing in size. When they finally realized that what they were looking at was not their beloved Rambo, the two young boys halted in their tracks. Gabe looked over at Miguel. As we sat in the studio, Gabe's eyes began to tear up. He said that despite all the trouble they had gotten into, it was the first time he had ever seen his brother scared. They didn't know it at that time, but what they were seeing, the thing that was watching them, was a cadejo, what we know as a kind of hellhound. The black dog shifted its ominous gaze between the boys in their house, looking back and forth over and over, as if acknowledging that any moment they were going to have to make a run for it. It stood as an imposing wall between them and a safe haven. The boys knew that they were too far to make it back to Carlos's home without being caught, but continuing down the road felt like certain death. Their best chance was to walk back the way they came. They slowly turned and started back when they heard their front door open. Their mother emerged from the doorway with her hand shielding her eyes from the floodlights. Throwing their fears to the wind, the brothers made the only decision they could. They broke into a sprint, running harder than they had ever had before to save their mom. The hound's its enormous head toward her. It catapulted its massive body into the air, leaping at least 30 feet in one terrifying motion before violently slamming into the ground and beginning its own mad dash toward the house. This dog-like creature cut a wide path through the tall weeds of the field. The loud, metallic sounding of the chains intensified as it closed in. Somehow the boys were able to get to their mother before the hound grabbed a hold of her and pulled her inside. They slammed the door behind them and retreated inside. Their mother prayed in a state of disbelief as the front door trembled with blow after blow from an enraged monster outside. After only a few moments of excruciating terror, the noise suddenly stopped, replaced by a loud car horn blaring from outside the garage. Gabe's father yelled at them to activate the metal-clad garage door from inside the house. Miguel hit the switch opening the garage door and was promptly scolded by his father for letting the dogs outside. Gabe and Miguel opened the front door and looked around, finding no signs of the cadejo. As they continued to investigate, they found poor Rambo, cowering in fear, hiding in a small crawl space under the stoop of their porch. As I wrapped my head around this intriguing story, taking some notes down as quickly as I could, Gabe's face lit up at my clear fascination with his experience. He told me he has another story, but that will be for another time. Tonight's final experience. This is not my encounter, but my dad's. I can tell you that ever since my sister and I were little girls, we grew up hearing this encounter around the campfire or when we had sleepovers. To this day, my dad swears by this encounter, and I know it myself by heart after hearing it so many times. So the encounter happened back when he was 16 years old. He was born in 1969, so you can do the math about what year it was. Well, every year my dad, his 3 brothers, and my grandmother would take a camping/hunting trip up to northern Minnesota, right on the border of Canada. If you knew my dad, you would know that he is like a survival junkie. He is very knowledgeable about the surrounding animals and vegetation wherever we go. Anyway, that year they once again took their trip to their familiar spot. This time, it was only his family and an older couple that had been checked into the campsite that they were staying at. Mind you, his family knew the older couple staying there, as they make an effort to be familiar with the neighbors, despite that they were probably a few miles far from where my dad's family were camping on that site. Well, one day my dad decided to do some exploring, and he finds a berry bush on the side of the gravel road. He knows these berries are edible and decides to snack on a few before moving along. He also knows that there are bears in the area, and being that he was at an animal feeding site, he finds it important to carve a small spear using a tree sapling. He continuously looks over his shoulders, keeping an eye out for bears or other predators like mountain lions. As he looks over his shoulder, he does a double take because he spots what he first thought was an 8-foot-tall naked black man walking across the gravel road. Given that he knows there are only 2 other people in this campsite miles away, in the middle of nowhere, he knows something is not right. Not to mention, there's a very small population of minorities here in the Midwest in general, and probably even less back in the 80s. It only took him a few seconds to realize this was not a random person, but it was what was described as a Sasquatch. It had dark brown/black fur, and it only took the creature 3 large steps to cross this wide gravel road. My dad is frozen in fear, and before he can react, another smaller Bigfoot comes running behind the bigger one after the bigger one had already disappeared into the other side of the woods. But this smaller one comes dragging a trash bag behind him, and my dad recalls that the sunlight hitting off of its fur showed that this smaller one had cinnamon-colored fur compared to the adult, darker one. After this, my dad musters up the courage to run back to the campsite where his youngest brother Michael is waiting for him. Michael reads my dad's face and knows something's wrong and asks him what happened. My dad refused to tell him what happened because he knew Michael wouldn't believe him, but Michael insists he wants to know. So my dad comes clean and says, "Okay, don't tell Dad, but I saw a Bigfoot, 2 of them." My dad's family was Baptist, and he knew my grandfather wouldn't have it if my dad told him what he had seen. Michael replies, "No, you didn't." My dad said, "Yes, I did." Michael, "Then show me where you saw it." Dad, "Okay, but there, take a spear, and I'll carve another one for myself just in case." They trek back to where my dad had seen the 2 Sasquatches, and they go into the woods that my dad saw them disappear into. They go through and find what looks like 2 footprints in the mud. This freaks my dad out, so he starts running back to the camp, thinking Michael is following behind him. But then my dad hears his little brother scream for him, "Sammy, Sammy!" At this point, my dad's terrified, thinking Michael got left behind and is probably getting torn apart, ripped to shreds by these Bigfoot. So he turns around and races back to find Michael. When he sees Michael, he's crouched over a ravine. Michael, "Sammy, look!" My dad asks what it is and then states, "Oh my God." There in the mud are two huge footprints next to a smaller set. He describes it as what looks like big feet had jumped into and out of the ravine, and the footprints were parallel to each other. The large footprints are about 1.5 feet, if not longer. After this, they decide to head back as it's getting darker out and they've seen enough. They're already freaked out. But what happens when they get back to their campsite? Michael spills the beans to my grandpa about what they saw. So my grandfather approached my dad and says, "Sammy, I don't think any Christian has ever seen a Bigfoot." My dad, "I didn't. I saw two." My grandfather, "Show me where these tracks are, Michael." My dad takes him to the site, and after a while of silence, my grandfather speaks. "So how long did it take you guys to make these tracks?" My dad's already upset because he knows what he saw and knew his brother shouldn't have snitched because their father wouldn't believe him. The next morning, my dad, his 3 brothers, and my grandfather make the 5-mile hike into the woods for hunting at early sunrise, when my grandfather randomly stops for a moment. My dad follows my grandfather's gaze to what happens to be more huge footprints in the mud, and at this point my grandfather knows something is not right. He knows that it would have been impossible for my dad to foretell where they were going the next morning for hunting, let alone spend time in the middle of the night making these tracks in the mud from 5 miles away into the middle of nowhere. My dad recalls seeing real fear in my grandfather's face for the first time. My grandfather is a pretty mean and scary guy, so for him to be scared is very unlikely. After that trip, my dad says his family never went back to that campsite again. Fast forward to about 20 years ago from today, my dad's oldest brother, Jonathan, visits the old campsite they went to as kids where my dad claims he saw a Sasquatch. And apparently now they have a bunch of Bigfoot signs posted up everywhere after enough reported sightings from over the years. So one thing is for sure, I am not quite sure if I believe in Bigfoot, but I am 100% sure my dad believes he saw a Bigfoot. All right, guys, some very creepy trail cam videos and some very creepy encounters. Guys, just for a heads up, I went up to where Tom Mezek disappeared yesterday. And as many of you know, he disappeared November 15th, 2015. So 3 days earlier, 8 years later, I went up. I usually go up around this time and kind of just look around, kick around a little bit. Brought the trail cam home and had it set for video this week. Got some pretty interesting video clips. Also got a couple of weird feelings out there. I think next time I go up there, there's this kind of little valley that I found today, and I think I'm gonna figure out a way of getting down into there without breaking my neck, and seeing if there's anything worth looking around down there. But yeah, it was very cold. It was only about 30, 32, 34 degrees. When I ended up leaving and getting back to my car, it was 28. So the Adirondacks are in winter mode right now. Anyway, guys, thank you for supporting the channel. Your support is what makes this channel so special and what continues to make it grow and go. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant. Keeping an eye on the children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share a little bit of information with those you love and care about, and it may just save their life someday. Until next time, God bless you all.